We're going to spend most of the semester talking about what makes a good chart and how to do that. But before we get to that, let's talk about what makes bad charts bad. There's an infinite number of ways a chart can be awful, but let's talk about these in buckets that cover a broad number of cases. There are bad aesthetics, bad data choices, and bad presentation. Here I'm going to lean on the work of Edward Tufte, a prominent data visualization critic and a person who's been the subject of more than one doodle in the margins of my diary. Bad aesthetics is probably the easiest type of chart to dunk on, mostly because it's so easily identifiable. Consequently, from the reader's perspective, this makes it less pernicious in other ways that create a bad visualization. Really, the worst that's going to happen here is that you're going to take more effort to read your chart. Bad taste is really its own thing. And obviously somewhat subjective, but you know it when you see it. Remember, a visualization isn't an art project. Keep it utilitarian first and avoid trying to make it your own. Second, we have issues related to the data themselves. You probably just watched me blather on for several minutes about different levels of measurement, which is particularly important here. Different levels of measurement require different types of charts. For example, you'd want to be careful not to chart ordinal data, which really indicates rank order values, as interval data, which has a consistent spacing. You might be able to say that from time 1 to time 2, 50% of people went from unsatisfied to satisfied, but you couldn't say that satisfaction increased by 50%. In effect, you wouldn't want to chart ordinal data as a dependent variable. On the other hand, you'd want to be careful when dealing with ratio data to make sure the ratios on the chart are approximately equal to the ratios in the data set. The second issue of data choice is using the wrong type of chart for what kind of analysis you're trying to perform. For example, consider a stock chart. Most people probably expect a line chart at this point, as you probably should for most time series. But what if you had a bar chart over time? Would that support the kind of analysis you're trying to make? If you're comparing two trends, do you want them to overlap or do you want them to be separate from each other? We're going to be spending the first half of the semester going over which data goes with which type of chart, but this is going to be a major consideration. Problems of bad presentation come in a lot of forms, but Tufte's concept of data ink sums this up pretty well. If you took my OIM 350 class, I talked about it then, and if you didn't take my OIM 350 class or you were hungover that day, I've included the relevant video from that class in the additional content section for this week. Bad presentation results when there's a lot of extraneous cruft in with the chart. Excessive coloration, unnecessary labels, grid lines, so on. Of course, going too hard on minimizing data ink also leads to its own issues, which you can see in figure 1.7 on page 8 of Healy. Another example of bad presentation is displaying data in a format that's not well suited to the data being displayed. Remember earlier when I said, what if you had a stock chart using bar charts? Well, that's an example of that. Furthermore, different ways of displaying data are going to be easier than others. For example, angles are going to be more difficult to distinguish than length, as you might have noticed in figure 1.22 of Healy. This gets compounded further when you consider you'll always only have 360 degrees to work with, and you really need a minimum of about 45 to really get any meaningful use out of it. If you want to know why pie charts are my enemy, this is why. There's one more way in which a chart can be bad, which are problems of bad intentions. Now in this class, we're going to be treating data as objectively as possible, irrespective of if it says what we want it to or not. If the data runs counter to your argument or what your preferences would be, it's really better to look for post hoc explanations rather than trying to look for ways to improve the truth.
But all I did was tell the truth.
Of course you did, but there's the truth and the truth.
Of course, throughout the semester, we're going to talk about how people manipulate charts to obfuscate data or to make problems seem bigger or smaller than they might actually be strictly on the merits. Now, here's where I challenge you to look at charts from a critical perspective. Consider the choices that went into each data graphic. How decorative did the designer make it? What kind of aesthetic choices did they make in putting the numbers in a visual form? Could it have been done better? Did you immediately understand the purpose of the chart? By being active critics yourselves, you're going to be better positioned to make quality visuals on your own.